Hey, everybody out there. We have a brand new podcast for you on a very important topic. And it stems from a CNN article that was run Monday of this week. And it says, surprisingly, at least to me, CNN exclusive FBI investigation determined Chinese made Huawei equipment could disrupt U.S. nuclear arsenal communications. Mark Collinsworth of Vere Global Capital Wealth Management is with us once again. And Mark, first of all, CNN has been serving virtually as a mouthpiece for the administration, I believe, and I think it's obvious. So why would they suddenly be exposing these alleged facts when it could reflect badly on the Biden administration? What's going on?
The only thing I can think of is if the government is making it public, it tells me that the government can't stop it. So they're basically putting it out there so that the Chinese will think, oh, they're on to us. Maybe we need to change our tactics, change our strategy, and maybe that change in tactics and strategy might reveal their plans more.
So, in other words, it's being put out there by us in order to trip up the Chinese or to help them avoid detection.
Well, if we're trying to help them to avoid detection, that to me is basically treason. So I'm going to go with the more patriotic reason and say they're putting the information out there to make the Chinese change strategies, and changing strategies might reveal more of their plans.
Well, the facts, alleged facts that are laid out in this article are just incredible. That Huawei is a telecommunications equipment manufacturer, among other things, and they've been supplying these telecommunication links to cell phone towers throughout the West and Midwest, hundreds of them, and many of them are near military bases. And the investigators here say that they could capture and decode and interfere with U.S. military codes to launch nuclear missiles. So, I mean, this is, if true, this is extremely alarming. And what adds to the mystery here is that the investigation, among the investigations, was something that centered around what was called the China Initiative. And in February of this year, guess what? The Biden administration shut down the China Initiative entirely. In other words, no more investigation. So what is going on?
We know the Democratic Party has always been kind of, lacking on security. There was that one senator that got caught. His girlfriend was actually a Chinese spy that they had to deport. And that was, a Democrat senator. It could be one of these things. They're trying to stop the investigation because they don't want to become more public that the Democrat really is another name for the Chinese party.
So in other words, they're making us vulnerable to a Chinese attack in order to protect their own behinds, to prevent us from learning about all the connections that they have with China.
That's one of the things I believe. Another thing, also, I'm sure you've seen the Chinese are buying up a lot of farmland and property in the United States. What's very concerning about that is a lot of that farmland is adjacent to very top secret military bases. Right. I mean, what's that? I mean, there was also a piece of property that was bought that was basically like 100 yards down the street from the White House. Yeah. What was that about? I mean, technically, as much as the Democrats have sold out the American people to the Chinese, what's stopping the Chinese from basically taking that building and putting a nuclear bomb in there, or putting a nuclear bomb in the farms that they have next to these military bases? And then if we go to war, there's no war because they throw one switch and 100 nukes go off in our backyard and there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, speaking of something that they wanted to build in Washington itself, they wanted to build an ornate Chinese garden in Washington, D.C., complete with temples, pavilions, and a 70-foot white pagoda, a project that thrilled local officials who thought it would bring in lots of tourists and lots of money for them. Now, again, the 70-foot pagoda could be another communications tower for the Chinese. I mean, how did this stuff even get that far? Now, what they're doing, this is elite capture. They're throwing money at politicians nationally and even locally, and making deals with them that seems benevolent. I guess any kind of naive person or greedy person, and so people think, well, they're making money. Let's deal with the Chinese. It's a windfall for us, and what they're really doing is espionage. I mean, how naive can our officials be?
It's just, I think it's a sellout. I mean, you're talking about building this Chinese temple in Washington, D.C. I mean, what would George Washington, Thomas Jefferson say? You got the White House, you got the Lincoln Memorial, you have the Washington Mutual, all very patriotic buildings and statues, and now you're going to throw up a building that memorializes our current enemy that's a communist country. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, you see, what this is, they're not just doing this with these military bases. They're throwing money at universities, throwing all kinds of money at projects for municipalities. And people say, well, it's great. We make money. The Chinese are good guys. But, I mean, this is the technique that they're using. And to me, it's become increasingly obvious, and it's been obvious for some time. So now, according to the CNN article, these are all FBI and other agency people informing CNN with the understanding that their names won't be revealed. So there's a whole bunch of them, according to the article. Now, is the military and the intelligence agencies waking up and they realize what Biden is doing? Or again, is it part of a larger plan and it's just a fake out? I can't make heads or tails of this.
I think it's a fake out. You also mentioned this. One thing, I'm sure you've seen the stuff with the was it 23andMe DNA thing, to where the FBI and military are concerned that the Chinese might have the technology to build a DNA weapon that specifically targets the DNA strands of Americans, not to target a Chinese. So you release this virus into the battlefield, and it won't kill any Chinese people, Chinese DNA. It will only kill American people that have American DNA in their system.
And according to reports, some of these genetic websites, ancestry sites, are run by the Chinese.
Yeah, that's right. And the websites, they say, they came out today and said, oh, we don't sell our information to anyone. Of course you don't sell it to anyone, because the people that would be buying it already own the site to begin with.
You see, the reason why everybody, the telecommunication companies, the smaller ones throughout the West and Midwest, grabbed onto the Huawei equipment is because it's cheaper. Mm-hmm. And according to these intelligence officials saying that it's so cheap that there's no logic in terms of it turning a profit for the Chinese company Huawei. So why are they doing it? So again, that points to the real purpose is espionage. Now, here's another thing. Our neighbor to the north, Mr. Trudeau, he allowed Chinese observers to come into Canada to observe Canadian military exercises on Canadian soil. And in turn, he sent Canadian officials to observe Chinese cold weather exercises in China. So, China can find cold weather elsewhere than Canada. So why would Trudeau be allowing Chinese observers to observe winter fighting techniques in Canada? I mean, what's going on there with Trudeau?
Yeah, I just don't get it. I mean, everyone seems to just embrace the Chinese, but I'm sure you've read, the Sun Tzu, The Art of War. There's literally a book that was written by the Chinese that's based on the founding principles of warfare and strategy. And the key thing, if you read Sun Tzu actually said you can sum up all master generals in just a few words, and that few words is deception.
Yeah, exactly.
Who can deceive the other person the best? And with that, I'll give you a funny story from the Cold War. In the we know this now because it's been declassified, but the Xerox machine that was sitting in the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C., it had a timer in it that every 6 months it would flash the maintenance light on it, and a Xerox maintenance repairman would have to come to the Xerox machine to repair it. Guess what? The Xerox repairman was actually a CIA agent, and what happened is every time they made a copy on that Xerox machine, there was a storage device that made an additional copy on it in the machine, and the repairman basically pulled the microchip out, and they had 6 months worth of Xerox copies of everything made on those copiers at the Russian embassy.
Yeah, that was us, but the Chinese haven't learned that trick from us. With all the
Correct.
intellectual property that they're stealing and all the technology that we're giving them.
And that's, we used to be the masters of deception. I mean, you look at World War II, we used to be the masters of deceiving our enemies into thinking something else. Today, we're now on the other side of the drawing board. We're the ones being deceived left and right.
Now, this Canadian story with Trudeau, there's two versions of it. The Canadian newspapers are saying there were actual Chinese troops training on Canadian soil, not just observers. But according to the official Canadian government website, they just sent observers. They didn't actually send troops to train there. So there's two versions of this. But even if it was just observers, why would you allow the Chinese Communist government to observe, how the troops would be fighting in cold weather?
That doesn't make any sense either. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the Spartans and the Roman Empire collapsed, was because they allowed their enemies to learn their tactics and strategies. They even trained their enemies. And then, I mean, you have no advantage on the battlefield. Aren't we doing the same thing here? I mean, it's just ridiculous. There's no word to describe it.
I mean, none of this makes sense. I mean, I could see the greed of private companies and private individuals as China is throwing money at them. But, the governments, should know better. And according to this article, the intelligence agencies within our government do know better. They're suspicious, but Biden isn't doing a darn thing. He's been soft on China, one thing after another, which leads to other profound and disturbing questions about Biden and his cohorts. Why are they soft on China, one thing after another, to take the heat off of China?
Well, this is one thing. I think the reason why Biden is so soft on them is because they may have stuff from all their business deals they did with Hunter Biden. They may have evidence that could actually get not only Joe Biden impeached, but probably incarcerated. There's also a theory, I've read theories like Ukraine. Hunter Biden was doing a lot of business in Ukraine, and now Russia's invading it, and Joe Biden is just sinking billions of dollars into trying to help defend Ukraine. Is it because Joe Biden knows Ukraine has information that could also get him impeached? And he knows if Putin gets his hands on that, he's trying to prevent Putin from getting stuff that will incarcerate him as a president?
Yeah, and also from what I understand, part of this too is just that they're siphoning off that money. People are getting rich on this. It's not, just about fighting the war. They're keeping it going in order to keep pumping that money in that's going to special interests here and in Ukraine.
Well, that, and also, but Joe Biden hadn't done anything correct during the last 2 years of his administration. I think he's hoping if he can get a win in the Ukraine, that might boost up his popularity and say, hey, I've got a foreign military success on my resume. But right now, it doesn't look that way either.
Yeah, and hopefully to erase the memory of the debacle in Afghanistan, that withdrawal that made no military sense either. And also, where were the generals, that were trying to prevent this? They went along with this.
Well, definitely. We spent the past 2 decades that the big air base up there in northern Afghanistan. We spent decades building an air base that had scared the living daylights out of the Chinese. Because if we ever went to war with them, we could just hit stealth bombers out of that base and just hit them in the backside all night long. And the Chinese, from my understanding, are making a bid to the Afghan government to buy it.
Yeah, that was a Bagram air base. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah,
the world, all kinds of equipment, surveillance equipment, positioned in the back door of China, where we could keep an eye on China. We could strike China from that position. Now that's all gone. Again, doesn't make any sense. Could this just be Joe Biden's incompetence or mental incapacity? I hate to say it, to suggest it or even think it, but is there some kind of a sellout plan? Let's even throw out the possibility of treason. I mean, because none of this makes sense.
I'm going to go with probably the simplest explanation on this. I think Joe Biden is so disconnected from reality, so senile, and doesn't have a clue to what's going on. He's just like President Grant after the Civil War in the lobbies. He'd get drunk and people would come in there and say, hey, Mr. President, will you sign this? And he'd sign it and didn't have a clue he signed it. I think Biden is signing off on this stuff, and somebody else is sitting back there handing him stuff to say, do this and do that. They're making tons of money off of it, and Joe Biden doesn't have a clue.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, who's pulling the strings and why are they pulling the strings in the manner that they're doing? So they're the ones that could be really endangering the country.
And the reason why is because they want him to take the blame. They get all the money, and if it ever blows up, you can say, well, hey, the president signed off on it. Why are you pointing your finger at me? I made $200 million off the deal.
Yeah. Well, we've talked previously in our podcast about the possibility that the Biden removal plan is already underway. And, him being isolated again with COVID after declaring that he had cancer. Is this the beginning of the move to get Biden the heck out of there before the midterms, or at least before 2021 to 2024?
I would not be surprised after we get past the midterms and the Democrats just see the shellacking they take in both the Senate and the House of Representatives, that Joe Biden just says, hey, I'm not going to run for another term. The COVID stuff is just wearing on my health too much, and that's his excuse. But at the same time, you can't put the vice president in there because she's just as unpopular as the president.
Worse. But, again, talking about being detached from reality. And don't forget that Gavin Newsom, governor of California, ultra liberal, who's messed up California, he was at the White House. So, are they talking to him about taking Biden's place? And the Democrats think that he's more electable than Biden?
He's only electable in California. And even then, don't forget, it was just last year they had that recall vote. So many Californians had basically had enough of them, and he basically squeaked by on that one. But if they think someone like Newsom is going to be able to take Texas and Tennessee and Florida, they are way out of touch.
Look what's happening. Some of these reverse positions now that they're taking because they know that they're in the tank and they don't want to be associated with Biden. Now, the mayors of Washington, D.C. and Chicago are now complaining, and New York are now complaining about all the migrants that are coming in, that they're messing up the social support system. They're being overwhelmed with all these illegals that are coming across the border unchallenged by the Biden administration. So, and that's another thing. Yeah, I mean.
And they're shipping them back. I saw today they've been sending them to Washington, D.C. and Chicago, and they're rounding them up in Chicago and Washington, D.C., and they're sending them back to Texas and Florida. Yeah. I mean.
So, it's coming back to bite them in the rear end now. So, it's becoming more and more chaotic, less and less sensible. And, I'll throw this out there. I know that you're fairly convinced it's going to be a Republican wave, and that's going to change who controls Congress. I'm not so sure. Because they're not going to leave quietly after everything that they put in place to take power. So, what are they going to do now? And if they're not going to go quietly, I think they're going to come up with something that's going to keep them in power.
Funny thing, I actually saw a poll today where they actually did a poll on both Republicans and Democrats on do you see in your lifetime a time where you'll pick up a weapon and actually try to overthrow the U.S. government because they are impinging on your constitutional rights? What I found so amazing about that, about a third of the people actually said they do see that happening in their lifetimes, but it was a third on both Republicans and a third on Democrats. And I have to think there's a lot of Democrats out here that really don't agree with the new Democratic Party.
Yeah. It's not the party that they grew up with. Certainly not my generation. It's changed. But even some of the young people now are having second thoughts about their adherence to the Democrats and the liberal line, which has just gone too far.
Another interesting thing, you've seen several Democrats up here that have said, we never said we want to defund the police. We said we should refund the police more. And there was actually a thing that came out on the RNC Day, 7 whole minutes with just 5-second clips of those exact same people saying, defund the police, dismantle it, get completely rid of the police department. When it comes election time, Democrats sure do have sure do embrace that Republican platform at election time, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. You know, the Republican attack ads could use all those sound bites previously showing the hypocrisy, but yeah, you know, it depends on how much money is behind the TV ads, how well they're constructed, how clever, and you know, they're changing their tune now. Oh no, we didn't want to defund the police, and you know, we're all for the secure border, this and that, and you know, some people may buy enough people may buy it to keep them in power.
I'll tell you something that really kind of irritates me, Larry, is right now in the like the Republican primaries, Democrats are actually picking Republicans in the Republican primary, and they're funding a Republican candidate, the one that they want to run against, which he might be the worst Republican candidate out of the group. They're funding him with unlimited amounts of money to get him in their election so they can take him on head to head in November. My question is, if the Democratic Party is for the poor people and is made up of the poor people, how are they throwing $20 and $30 million at a Republican campaign and then throwing another $70 to $80 million at their own campaign? I mean, where's the money coming from?
Party of special interest and elitists. That's what it's become. Yeah, what they're doing is they're funding the campaigns of the most radical Republicans, the most far-right Republicans.
Yeah.
Their positions seem totally unreasonable, and hoping that you know they could attack them that way, shoot them down. That's why they're hoisting them up in order to shoot them down.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm saying. All these strategies are afoot. So don't count on them losing power in the midterm elections.
Well, that's just like who's the Stacey Abrams in Georgia?
Yeah.
So far, I think she's raised, I forget how much money that she's raised, but 80% of all the money that she's raised has come from outside of Georgia.
Yeah.
So who's wanting her to win in Georgia so bad?
Yeah, I mean these are national applications for the candidates they want. And plus, we have George Soros, you know, behind the scenes, and you know that's a whole other story that we should get into sometime. I mean, what possesses this 86-year-old billionaire who's always been a greedy capitalist and never a humane person? Suddenly, you know, he's become so left-wing and woke and progressive and all that. You know, what's the real plan behind him funding all these whacked out prosecutors and other political candidates?
I think I'm going to go back to the most basic element. It's just greed. I think, the old quote of Dale Carnegie, who in 1932 or something was worth $700 million. Someone asked him how much money's enough, and he said just $1 more.
Yeah,
but I think, of course.
But how is he going to make money by going woke? I mean, that's anti-capitalist, isn't it?
Well, no, a lot of the stuff with the woke, I'm sure, kind of like just the same thing. Al Gore. Al Gore really touts climate change stuff, right? A lot of people don't realize this, but Al Gore runs a $40 billion hedge fund called New Generation. And that hedge fund has huge investments in solar technology, wind technology. He's pushing climate change because he stands the chance of pocketing billions of dollars off of his investments, just like George Soros. George Soros runs a hedge fund. He's made huge investments in climate technology.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, maybe
that's why they're pushing it. And not to mention, people like George Soros do some very underhanded business deals. If you do underhanded business deals, you want DAs in positions to make sure they can look the other way if you help them get into positions. So it's kind of like, look at the same thing. Hunter Biden, the reason why Hunter Biden is skirting back all the crimes he's committed over the past decade is because Garland is basically the head of the Department of Justice.
Yeah, Garland doesn't prosecute anybody
except Republicans.
That's right. Well, all right, wrapping this up now. Again, the CNN article on China, how it's really creating all these inroads to get our technology, and now there's a threat to our nuclear missile system with these Huawei cell phone equipment throughout the West and the Midwest, where all the missile bases are. So let's see where this goes. I mean, this is a big CNN story. let's see who picks it up after that, since, you know, it's a surprise that CNN even put it out. Let's see how far this goes, or is it just going to die? You know, who knows? So, all right.
I was going to throw one last thing. About 2 years ago, the best antivirus and phishing software that you can have is by a company called Kaspery. It's actually a Russian-based software company that used to be the official antivirus program for the military, CIA, government, and everything. And about 2 years ago, somebody got the idea: we have Russian software on all of our computers. Shouldn't we think about getting rid of that? And 2 years ago, they outlawed that software from being installed on government computers. It's just, I mean, how stupid can people be?
Well, this is what I'm saying. Our military, again, that makes no sense. You know, nobody thought that the Russians might be inserting the spy equipment in the antivirus program.
The thing that also gets me, Larry, why do we have to go to a foreign country to get software and semiconductors and telecommunications equipment? The United States invented the semiconductor. We invented the phone.
Yeah.
But yet we buy all that stuff from other countries. We invented the car, but yet all these other countries make the products that we invented.
Well, that goes back to capitalistic greed, where they can make the products much cheaper, and even hauling them back to the U.S., it's still a lot cheaper than paying American workers. So, you know, again, it's unrestrained capitalism at work.
Yeah.
So, all right, Mark Collinsworth of Vere Global Capital Wealth Management. Thanks for being with us. Thank all of you out there once again for joining us. And we'll be back with more topics that seem increasingly to make no sense. See you later.
Right. Have a good night.